I didn't manage to launch Havoc in 2020 due to a combination of COVID and medical problems. Even this year my launch on the 28th of May was a month later than usual. The bar had changed a lot in 2020 since I last crossed in 2019. The reports from the Deben Estuary pilot indicated that it had changed even more in 2021 and was yet again very shallow. But just how shallow was difficult to determine. These drone pictures were particularly worrying, showing what looks like a possible drying patch almost on the track from Knoll Spit to West Knoll. The Trinity House chartlet shows the position of the buoys, depths out to sea and the depths over the knolls, but gives absolutely no indication of depths in the channel. Over the years, John White, the Deben Harbour pilot, has attempted to give an indication of depth in the channel early in the year, with a warning that they are subject to change throughout the summer. What is unclear is whether the depths are just what he measured at low water on a spring tide, or whether they are corrected to chart datum. His chart for 2020 indicates that these were the depths recorded on the 24th of April 2020, which was indeed a spring tide. His chart for 2021 also reports the depth as being recorded on the 24th of April, but in 2021. This was not a spring tide, and I suspect it was just a labelling error. However, the latest May chart is the second edition this year. The major difference that I could spot was that the shallow spot off East Knoll between Knoll Spit and West Knoll, shown as 0.1 metres, was originally shown as 0.9 metres. I understand the new figure was obtained on the 28th of April by John Ranson, who took the drone footage of the bar on the 27th. John White took John Ranson out in his boat on the 28th to see just how shallow the area of the breaking water on the bar actually was. They recorded a depth of 0.9 metres and the Harwich tide gauge was showing 0.74. So round figures, 0.1 metres on the bar at lowest astronomical tide. As high water at Woodbridge is half an hour later than at the bar, it is inevitable that those launching or leaving tide mill in deep draft boats will arrive at the bar about an hour and a half to 2 hours after local high water. My records show that I normally cross at about 1 hour 45 minutes after high water, so I base my predictions on arriving around that time. Previously, I've always used the Reed's Walton-on-Naze tidal curve and corrected tidal times to calculate predicted depth, but I've always found that on the ebb at least they predict 0.1 to 0.2 metres more than I actually find. Tide times now produce a graph showing predicted heights with a cursor you can scroll across to indicate the depth at a given time. I had not previously used this, as it's no good in a mobile and did not even seem precise enough on a desktop. However, I realised that if you enlarge the image on screen, you can use the cursor accurately. You only get 15 minutes increment in times, well, that's good enough for most people. You can't match the times from both methods exactly, but you'll see in this comparative graph that tide times tends to predict less water than the Reed's method. So I prepared, hoping for a passage time of something like 3:30, but expecting something more like 3:45. Fortunately, there were no other deep draft boats launching, and the shallow draft boats were long gone. Dark winds put me in as soon as they could, 40 minutes before the predicted local high water. But there was a 0.2 metre negative tidal surge going on, so I was only just floating and had to motor hard to get out into the channel, and even in the channel to start with. I was off the tide mill by 2 o'clock, and the tide was still flooding, but there was only 2.2 metres showing on the sill gauge. It was supposed to reach 2.6 metres 25 minutes later, but I doubt it ever made it. The upper Deben is well buoyed and easy to navigate. Just be sure not to miss a buoy out. it's easy to lose one amongst the moorings. Aside from the bar itself, one point that can worry visitors to the Deben is Loder's Cut. I admit sailing through a passage demarcated only by twigs can be a bit off-putting, but provided you don't turn into the passage until you can see right through, there is plenty of water. My guide is that if there is enough water to get over the sill at the tide mill, there is enough water to go through Loder's Cut. On this day there was 2.2 metres showing on the sill, and the least depth we found was 2.8. The echo sounder under-reads by 0.1 of a metre, so the actual depth was 2.9 metres, and Havoc draws just shy of 2 metres, so there's plenty of water under the keel, at least by East Coast standards. On the way down the river, it's a good idea to check the Harwich Haven live data page for tidal surges. On first sight, the Harwich gauge didn't show much of a surge, but the time I crossed the bar, there was a 0.15 metre negative surge. The approach gauge showed even a bigger negative surge at high water, and 0.17 metres when I crossed. In the event, I was early enough for this not to be an issue. But if I were crossing at the 2-hour point, it might well have eaten too much into my safety margins, and I might have decided to abort. Down as far as Waldringfield, the channel is buoyed through the moorings, but from Ramsholt onwards, you're left to pick your own route. From Ramsholt onwards, you'll have about 2 knots of tide underneath you, and when you get to the constriction at Felixstowe Ferry, this rapidly increases to 3.5 to 4 knots. Once you're past the last of the moorings, keep an eye out for the ferry, move over to the right, giving the red buoy a respectable clearance, and try to get fairly close to the west bank by the time you're abeam of the second large red groin. Depending on your boat speed, by this point you will have 9.5 to 10 knots of ground speed. That will make for a hard impact if you hit the shingle, but you need boat speed to cope with the eddies, cross tides and the chop in breezier conditions. Personally I dropped down to 6 knots, but no less. From the ferry to this point there had been at least 7 metres, which was now dropping down to 5. John White reports a shallow ridge extending across the channel abeam Martello Tower. This chart shows 0.8 metres more water here than on the shallowest point of the bar itself. However, I found only 3.1 metres, just 0.2 metres more than on the bar. Once over the ridge, there was a little over 4 metres approaching mid-knoll, and it only shallowed to 3.9 metres between mid-knoll and knoll spit. It seemed very odd turning right at Knoll Spit and heading back in towards the beach. With a short distance of passing the buoy, the depth fell to an indicated 2.9 metres. That's 3 metres true. And it stayed that way right up to West Knoll. On passing West Knoll and heading out to sea, the depth rapidly rose to 4 metres and stayed that way. In the end, I passed West Knoll at 1 hour 26 minutes after local high water. That's according to Tide Times data. Harwich Haven claimed that high water at Woodbridge Haven is 11 minutes earlier. Seemingly insignificant, but that equates to 0.1 metre less water. Crossing at 1 hour 45 minutes after high water would have been acceptable, but it would have been a difficult choice at the 2 hour point, particularly taking the negative surge into account. Later than that, it would just have been too dangerous, although obviously shallow draft boats have more choice. Entry into the Deben for boats wishing to reach Woodbridge is less stressful than the exit, as it has to be done on the flood. Between 1 and 2 hours before high water is ideal. The main problem this year is identifying West Knoll from the Haven buoy, as from a distance it appears to be on the beach, among the beach huts.